the next stage of the sanctions regime overall should include the introduction of the so-called secondary sanctions, right? The sanctions on the countries who are enabling Russia to avoid the sanctions regime. And the bill of Senator Lindsey Graham in the US Senate is actually just about that. And he just played golf apparently with Donald Trump on the weekend, and they discussed it. And Donald Trump apparently said that he's now considering supporting that bill. And that bill will introduce 500% tariffs on all countries who enable Russia, right? So if some country is like China buying Russian oil, and Russia is using the proceeds of this oil trade to fund the war machinery, bang, 500% tariffs.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Yuriy Sak. Today we're joined by Yuriy Sak, who was the advisor to the Minister of Strategic Industries and was formerly advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. Yuriy, welcome.
Thank you for having me again, Lewis.
Well, Russia has again over this weekend launched one of its largest air attacks of the war. That was yesterday morning. What's the situation in Kiev and in Ukraine like now?
You know, by now we have to stay kind of optimistic, and we use humor as our coping mechanism. So we are joking among ourselves, those who are in Kiev, or for that matter in any other Ukrainian city, that if on any given night, if by 10 p.m. We don't have the reports of missiles and drones launches from the Russian side, it means that we're going to have a quiet night, or relatively quiet night. So that's the reality. And of course, when we do get those reports, and we get them pretty much every third or fourth day, and there is a reason behind that, and I will explain it. Of course, you know, these days, these attacks are much more large scale. The Russians are using considerably larger amount of variety of different projectiles and drones and missiles of different kinds. So and these attacks, they last longer. So for example, the one that happened one night before last night, the total number of different things that launched at us was more than 500, which included more than 300 drones. It included cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. So overall, of course, this is I mean, it has become part of our reality, but on a night like this, people stay in bomb shelters because, as we have seen, you know, our air defenses are struggling with this amount of, with this size of, or this scale of these attacks. And sometimes when these missiles get through, then we see destruction. We see, you know, the death of civilians in residential apartment blocks, and for that matter, people go with their children and their cats and dogs. Everybody goes to bomb shelters. So that's the reality. And you know, the reason why, I mean, this is probably jumping forward a little bit, but so there was talk, or Russians were planning to have another kind of massive push from the beginning of summer. And we've been here before, actually. So whenever they start something like that and they don't succeed, they realize that they're failing, they resort to the old proven terror tactics. Okay, so without being able to achieve success on the front lines, and we cannot call their advances, which is, you know, 50, 100 meters a day along the front lines, these are not advances that they were counting on. So they're trying to compensate for the lack of this battlefield success by terrorizing peaceful Ukrainian cities. And from where we see it, this will continue for as long as they're capable to do that.
And we heard that as part of that air defense mission, an F-16 and the pilot was lost during those strikes. What do we know about that crash and what happened?
The investigation into this tragic incident is already underway. The air forces will carry it out, and at some point we will know the exact details of what happened. But what we do know is that pilot Ustinov, who is only 32 years old, and he was one of Ukraine's top pilots, the one who mastered the F-16s, and he was really good at at his missions. And on that specific night, he was going after his eighth target. So that means that he actually intercepted and destroyed before he was in that incident. He destroyed 7 Shahed drones, which means he saved a lot of lives. And according to the Air Force, when his F-16 was suffered the damage, he didn't catapult because being a hero, he tried to veer away the aircraft from the residential areas, and so he saved even more lives. But of course, he sacrificed his own. This is why President Zelensky yesterday awarded him with the honor of being the hero of Ukraine. But of course, it's a tragic incident, and pilots are very valuable. I mean, people are very valuable for Ukraine, but pilots are even more so because they protect lives. And the fact that he's gone now is a big blow to our Air Force.
It is significant, though, to see the F-16 playing an important role in Ukraine's military and defence at the moment, isn't it? What role does the F-16 play at the moment? How much is it used, and what is it used for by Ukraine?
We made it very clear that at this stage, the major function of F-16s would be, and it is actually today, F-16s are part of our air defense system, multi-layered air defense system. So F-16s are doing their sorties whenever these combined drone and missile attacks happen. They intercept ballistic missiles, they intercept drones, and that's the main function. Of course, they carry out other missions as well, but the brunt of their functionality is complementing the air defense shield of Ukraine. And of course, this incident, this tragic incident, underscores one more issue. Ukraine is in need, not just in need of F-16s, but we also would benefit, in particular, to protect us from these drones. And I will repeat: Russians are now producing up to 100 of such drones every day, which kind of explains the regularity with which they carry out these attacks. So they launch an attack in which they use 300 plus drones. Then it takes them 3 more days to accumulate, another significant batch, and they unload it again. So for us to be able to protect our cities from these drones, of course, we would also probably need things like Apache helicopters, like military helicopters, because they are more suitable actually for handling these threats, because F-16, as you imagine, it's a jet which flies at supersonic speeds. So going after Shahed drones, which are at the moment actually, the upgraded versions are actually filled with cluster munition, with shrapnel, which is very dangerous. And of course, F-16 needs to approach it very closely before it actually disables it. So there are other types of military aircraft, in particular military helicopters, that could be more suitable for these kind of missions. And I think we will begin talking to our partners about this as well.
And there have also been more airstrikes just this morning on Kyiv Yuriy. That's reportedly another drone strikes. There are also a lot of missile attacks going on at the moment as well, we understand. So how critical is the need for things like more Patriot batteries and Patriot missiles, or air defense systems similar to that?
Air defense systems, they have always been top priority for Ukraine. And these are not just Patriot systems. There are other systems such as NASAMS, such as IRIS-T, and these are crucial for protecting Ukrainian cities. The reason why we badly need more Patriot systems, and this is the issue that is raised by Ukraine on the highest level with the US administration, is because Patriot systems are the only ones capable of intercepting and shooting down ballistic missiles, because there is no other system at the moment. There's no alternative. It's only Patriot systems that can detect and destroy ballistic missiles. And when ballistic missiles hit Ukrainian cities, it takes a very short time for them to actually reach Ukrainian cities, and Patriots are the only ones that are capable of doing that. And of course, we don't have enough of them at the moment. And we've said to our partners in the US that we're able and willing to actually buy these systems. But you've heard probably, as well as your listeners have heard, that President Trump just most recently said that at the moment they will consider this option, selling these Patriot systems to Ukraine. But President Trump said that they need these in Middle East to protect Israel and protect their air bases in other parts of Middle East. So it's a challenge, but we hope we will work towards solving this problem.
Mm. And at the NATO summit in The Hague last week, we did see Donald Trump, when he was asked by a Ukrainian journalist, say that he would look into again the idea of sending more Patriot missiles or batteries to Ukraine. That presumably is encouraging to see that the Americans are still open to the idea, at least.
Well, of course, I mean, first of all, that was a very unusual show of emotion on the part of President Trump, and this interview, of course, became viral in Ukraine, and everybody watched it, and of course, it instilled a sense of hope, because indeed, the way President Trump responded to that question was very optimistic. But at the same time, we will have to see, what the actions are. It's a good sign, but it needs to be followed through, and we need to see those actions to actually say that they've translated into reality.
It's not just Russia that has been launching air attacks. Ukraine has been doing the same, but obviously on a much different style. Rather quietly over the weekend, the SBU announced another series of drone attacks on Russian airfields, targeting, among other things, Russian Su-34 jets and hitting helicopters in Crimea, quite importantly as well. How important are these continuing attacks on Russian air bases, and what sort of impact do they have?
Well, Luz, first of all, I would like to stress that we here in Ukraine, we are not just sitting idly and asking our partners to provide us with weapons and with means of defense. We are working very hard to produce our own capabilities. And for example, the missions that you are referring to, they are carried out by our deep strike long-range drones. And these drones, we have in the last year alone, we have increased the production of these drones, and there are different kinds of them. We have increased it 22 times. So we understand that this is a war in which, for the time being, Ukraine does not have ballistic missiles or, long-range missiles in the amount that we require. So we need to find asymmetrical ways of responding to the Russian threat. And of course, hitting hard their military infrastructure, their war machinery, is our asymmetric response. So we continue to increase the production of these deep strike drones. And as our political and military leadership have said many times during the past few days, there are much more missions in the pipeline that will hurt Russian military machine and will, demonstrate to the world that Ukraine still has cards, and we will continue to play them effectively.
And what does it tell us about Russia's defences and Ukraine's capability to innovate? That Crimea and deep bases within Russia can still be repeatedly hit. I mean, we had such a significant attack when those bombers were blown up this month, and Russia, seemed to act to try and start protecting these aircraft, and yet Ukraine is still able to hit them.
Yeah, so on the one hand, what this tells us, and not just us, but to the world, because, Russia used to be, and probably still has plans to remain, a large exporter of weapon systems. There are countries like India, Pakistan, many others, who continue to procure, for example, air defense systems, S-400s from the Russians. But what we have done has demonstrated something that we've been saying about Russia for a long while now, that very often Russia is more about PR and just nice picture, but the efficiency of their weapon systems is very, very doubtful, and we have demonstrated it. On the other hand, we have to remember that we are now fighting a modern warfare, And in this type of new hybrid warfare, which includes both legacy systems, like tanks and armored vehicles and jets, we are also, for example, 70% of the damage that we inflict on the Russian armed forces and their military equipment is done by drones. 70%. That's a huge figure. So while Russian military industrial complex is probably not that relevant in the context of legacy systems, they are really ramping up their innovation sector, and we're seeing a very, very tight race of technologies on the front lines. And that is something that we are aware of. We are investing our best, engineering minds into this race, because the cycle within which a newly introduced weapon becomes obsolete has now shrunk to 6 weeks. So you bring in something to the front line, 6 weeks later, it is no longer relevant. If you look at, for example, the front line right now, it's very rare that you will see tanks or, like big machinery. It's small buggies with electronic warfare equipment loaded up with small FPV drones, with fiber optic drones. So the nature of warfare is changing, and the military industrial complexes, both of Russia and Ukraine, are changing. And so should the European defense industry change. And this is why we are constantly in talks with our European partners. We are open to transferring the unique knowledge that we have from the battlefield. Ukraine and Russia, there's only two countries with that unique knowledge of the modern warfare. So we are witnessing this transformation of the nature of war, and it should be reflected in our approach to how we plan our defense spendings, our defense industries, and so on and so forth.
And meanwhile, on the front line of this conflict, Russia is still trying to grind forward. Just last week, we heard from General Syrsky, in charge of the Ukrainian military, that Russian advances in the north near Sumy had been halted. So what is the situation like in Kharkiv at the moment?
Russians are amassing troops, both in the north as well as in the south, because we have reports that they are preparing for more attacks near, for example, Zaporizhia region. And the same goes for Sumy, up north, Kharkiv, of course. The reality is this. They are trying to advance. They are taking enormous losses. Their losses are about 30,000 plus soldiers a month, wounded and killed. If you compare it with the figure that they are recruiting a month, about 35 to 40,000. So they are experiencing huge shortage of manpower, and we are degrading their military equipment. So this is what I said at the beginning, right? The summer offensive, which they had in mind, hasn't worked out the way they planned. But of course, this still translates into terror unleashed on cities like Kharkiv, because Russians, for example, are now sometimes capable of reaching Kharkiv even with drones, like something that they were not able to do before. They are launching new types of, for example, glide bombs. Okay, so they have created this hybrid, this Frankenstein of mixture of a rocket and glide bomb, which carries 300 kilogram payload, and it can go 120 kilometers deep into Ukrainian territory. And that's actually another area where F-16s are used to kind of fend off these attacks, to scare away, so to push the Russian jets which are launching these glide bombs away from the front lines, from cities like Kharkiv, Sumy, and others.
And that grinding strategy that Russia is using has had consequences for their military. Ukrainian intelligence now assesses that over 1 million Russian soldiers have been lost in this war. There isn't this, unlimited supply of manpower in Russia, is there? That a lot of people suggest there is. What sort of impact is that going to have?
Well, it's already having an impact, as you can see, because their forces are stretched along the very long front line, which I will remind you is almost 900 kilometers. And that translated into the lack of progress. Their plans again failed. Now, it also means that sooner or later, they will never give up on their plans, which are to conquer as much of Ukraine as possible, preferably the whole of Ukraine. Now, that means that there will come a point where they will face a very difficult choice, right? They will have to announce what we call the general mobilization. Now, that's not going to go down very well within the Russian society, and of course, that's going to cause more problems for the terrorist regime in the Kremlin. Now, another important factor is that sustaining such a huge army requires enormous resources. And we are seeing that even top Russian leadership is now admitting that Russia is on the verge of the economic recession. Now, the economic problems that they're going through right now are really, really critical. And this is another theme that we are using and pushing for very strongly with our partners, if we now strengthen the sanctions, if the international community tightens the sanctions grip on Russia, we will see their economy tumble even sooner. That will result in them being unable to prosecute this war. That will result in sooner achieving just peace and stability in Europe.
And we have heard about some of that economic sanction support from partners of Ukraine. The EU is considering an 18th round of sanctions at the moment. They're just trying to get that passed with partners who are less keen on the sanctions. Even in the US, in Congress, we did see some consideration of new sanctions, although that appears to be on hold for the time being. How confident are you in Kiev that these sanctions will eventually come in?
Right, that's a very good question. We have very serious teams that are dedicated solely on analyzing and scrutinizing the sanctions regime and coming up with the recommendations for our partners as to how to actually make it work better. Just 2 days ago, we had a huge conference here in Kiev attended by diplomats, by ambassadors from different European countries. It was a conference called Fair Play. And for the whole day, we were telling our foreign partners about the reality of the sanctions regime. And the reality of the sanctions regime is the following. Sanctions are not a silver bullet, which we were hoping they would become. So sanctions regime have not resulted in immediate suffocation of the Russian economy. However, with time, sanctions regime makes it more difficult for Russia to, procure weapons to run their economy, and it has the cumulative effect that is hitting the Russian economy gradually but strongly. Now, we have shown to our friends, those who attended that conference, which was attended also by President Zelensky, we have shown there was an exhibition of, for example, Shahed drones, which we have mentioned here, and the ones that we were able to intercept in good shape and dissect them. And in each Shahed drones, there are tens of components. You would be surprised, from countries even like the US, like European countries. And the way Russia gets them is through third countries. So there is a country, for example, like Kazakhstan, which is not under sanctions, and it acquires stuff which it sells on then to Russia. So the next stage of the sanctions regime overall should include the introduction of the so-called secondary sanctions, right? The sanctions on the countries who are enabling Russia to avoid the sanctions regime. And the bill of Senator Lindsey Graham in the US Senate is actually just about that. And he just played golf apparently with Donald Trump on the weekend, and they discussed it. And Donald Trump apparently said that he's now considering supporting that bill. And that bill will introduce 500% tariffs on all countries who enable Russia, right? So if some country is like China buying Russian oil, and Russia is using the proceeds of this oil trade to fund the war machinery, bang, 500% tariffs. So there are still things which haven't been done. Same goes, for example, for the oil trade. We need to reduce the price of oil. If the price of oil is $30 per barrel, that will be a whole different ballgame. Russia will not be able to continue this war if they're in that position. So sanctions coupled with smart tactics on the oil market is something that we are working on very hard, trying to convince our partners, and we're seeing some understanding on their part.
And on the other side of the US's involvement in this conflict at the moment, Russia has said on talks it's waiting for Ukraine or the US to make some sort of offering on peace talks. But it seems quite hard to pin down any coherent position from the Russians at the moment, frankly. Is there any belief in these talks that could go on in Turkey amongst Ukrainians?
The only area in which these talks are actually working is the exchange of prisoners of war. For us, because we value the life of every Ukrainian who is kept in Russian prisons, it is also very important. But as for the other aspects of these peace talks, so far we have seen no willingness or readiness on the part of Russia to actually play the ball. In a way, it's funny, but by now Ukraine has learned the art of the deal. We are a good student of the course art of the deal. I think the European partners are actually learning how to play this game, and things, judging by the outcome of the NATO summit, we can see that progress has been made. But Russia is unable to actually do anything, and they are a very bad student of the art of the deal. So that will hopefully result in Donald Trump, being more motivated to use the leverages that he has, because for example, Iran-Israeli war has shown is that peace through force can work. Okay, so. And peace through force is the formula that Donald Trump used in reference to Ukraine before as well. So we need to force Russia into first agreeing to ceasefire and then achieving just peace. And this force, it's not just military force, but I will repeat, sanctions, dealing with the Russian shadow fleet that enables their oil trade, so on and so forth. So peace through force, that's the probably format that we pin our hopes on. The actual existing format in Turkey, that's looking very, very skeptical and not optimistic.
Well, Yuriy Sak, thank you very much for speaking to me today on Frontline. Yuriy Sak, advisor to the Minister of Strategic Industries. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Luis, for having me. Thank you.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.